Welcome to the Investor Shed Podcast with Nick Beveridge, the ultimate source for all things investing and beyond. For free tools, tips, and tricks, go to northidahorei.com. Today's episode features Shawn Dolan. Shawn is a seasoned investor who started with a HELOC on his personal residence and over time turned it into 131 rentals. Stay tuned.
Shawn Dolan, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Nick. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So, locally around here, you're a pretty big deal. You've got...
Don't know if I'm a big deal or not, but...
You are.
Okay.
You attracted one of the biggest crowds at our RIA meeting that I've ever had. I think we had over 50 people. It was like it was a record-breaking attendance at the time. So you must have followers.
Okay.
But yeah, if you don't mind, just telling your story a little bit, how you got into real estate and how you went from 20 to 131.
Yeah, be happy to.
Yeah.
Well, we started investing about 18 years ago. It always kind of had the bug, saw that as a way to grow wealth, and read about every real estate investing book I could find.
Uh-huh.
And
Do you have any favorite books?
Mr. Keller's book, The Real Estate Millionaire, is a great one.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
I'm a fan of that one.
My current favorite book is The One Thing.
Mm-hmm.
I've read that 3 or 4 times.
So you're a Keller fan.
Oh, he did a wonderful job on those books.
Yeah.
Especially The One Thing. That's definitely one of my favorite books.
Yeah.
Anyway, my wife told me, kind of get off the, do something or stop buying all these books. So we went out and we got a $60,000 home equity line of credit on our house and bought a dumpy duplex in Spokane on the lower South Hill.
Right.
And of course...
And you were living in Idaho at the time?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we chose that because properties were a lot cheaper in Spokane and the tax rates were a lot less compared to the Idaho side of the line. Similar duplexes were going for about $250,000 a piece at the time in Coeur d'Alene, and we were picking them up in Spokane for $85,000 a piece.
So about what year was this? Do you remember?
The first ones were like 2005, 2006,
Gotcha.
just kind of during the big run-up last time.
Yeah, just, one of the peaks of the markets.
Yeah,
almost.
and as you run into, if you're buying rental property, the previous sellers just had bodies in there that really weren't performing, and of course they don't disclose that. So when you get into it, you had to go through the eviction process, get them out, and then clean it up, and new carpet, new paint, and re-rented it at higher rents. Waited a year or so and then had it reappraised and pulled the equity out and just kept rolling it till we got up to 20 doors. I guess Bigger Pockets calls that the Burr Method now. It was kind of before they were around.
They coined the term.
They coined the term.
It's been out there forever.
It's a popular term now.
Yeah. So your first one was a duplex that you bought for about 60 or so?
It was 85.
85, okay.
Yep, it was 2 bedroom, 1 bath each side.
Uh-huh.
I think he was renting each side for about $450 a month.
Yeah.
That's when the tenants that he had were actually paying the rent. And we bumped it up to $550 a month after we put new carpet and paint in it. And when we sold them a couple of years ago, we sold them for $169,000 for that particular duplex, and the rents were at $800 per side.
Great.
So we did quite well on it.
Mm-hmm. Now, if we can go back a little bit, when you first bought it, though, were you nervous at all? Being your first investment?
We were.
Were you pretty well prepared? Or? Okay.
No matter how much you read, the first one's always kind of got you real nervous, and you're always scared to make that first step.
Mm-hmm.
Once you do one deal, it's easier to do another deal, and then it gets easier and easier as you go on. And within a couple of years, we were up to 20 doors.
Did you self-manage all your properties?
We did. The stuff we had in Spokane, we self-managed.
Okay.
And during this particular market run-up, we decided, well, we're going to sell at the peak once in our lives. So we sold all of them and then 1031 exchanged them into the Midwest and grew that 20 doors to 100 doors. And the income from that replaced my day job and then some. So we decided it was time to take an early retirement and freed up our retirement funds. We self-directed that and self-directed 401k, and then bought 34 more doors with that. So we were at 134 doors up until a couple weeks ago when we sold 3 houses.
Right, yeah. So I definitely want to get more into the Midwest purchasing. But if we can go back real quick, when you had the 20 doors in Spokane and you were self-managing, you also had another full-time job, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
How were you able to manage all those properties? Were you using some sort of software? What was
Just
it like
by
self-managing 20 properties? When you're also-
Microsoft Excel, recording the
okay.
expenses. Initially, we did all the bookkeeping ourselves,
Mhm.
and when the tenants would call after work, I'd go fix toilets. Broken window, I'd get a window, replace that, and paid the kids to go mow the lawns every weekend. Hauled them and the lawnmowers over so they could mow the lawns,
Yeah.
and just maintained and managed all, collected the rents myself the whole bit. And it became real apparent at 20 doors that doing my own bookkeeping really wasn't my jam.
Yeah.
So I hired a bookkeeper at that point, and that made life a lot better.
Right. Yeah.
And before that, we were constantly filing extensions, and then I'd spend the whole summer in my home office processing receipts and creating Excel spreadsheets from it and to give it to my accountant. I thought, this isn't much fun. So it was much better hiring a bookkeeper when you get to a certain level. It frees your time up quite a bit.
I couldn't agree more. I could not do what I can do now without an assistant helping, where I can just drop receipts in her in basket, and I just make little notes on them, and everything goes to its proper category and property, and yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the
makes
tips
life
that I
easier.
recommend to people. When you first start, you'd have to do a lot of it yourself because the finite margins are slim.
Mm-hmm.
But as you get more properties, certainly as you get to 15 or more, hire a bookkeeper. It gives you
Yeah.
back your life.
So, okay. So 2005-ish, you start buying properties. You use the Burr strategy to get up to 20 doors.
Yep.
And so 10, 12 years later is when you decide it's time to sell these and move to the Midwest.
Yeah, I was involved in RIA in Spokane.
Yeah.
And there were people that were investing in Kansas City that kept saying, Shawn, you got to come to Kansas City. There's cheap deals and good returns on investments. And I pestered me for about a year, and I decided, well, I'll do some research. I started finding different markets in the Midwest. Kansas City was a little higher priced than some of them. And we chose the Southern Illinois market after flying out and looking at a bunch of places and looking at the returns on investment, and bought a first package of about 18 houses from another investor.
Wow. Okay. Now, did you buy this package before you sold your Spokane properties, or did you sell?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, once we had the first of the Spokane properties under contract to sell, we started looking in earnest and got this first package under contract.
Gotcha.
So we could pull off the 1031 with the time frames that they tie you to.
Gotcha. Okay, so you use the 1031.
Mm-hmm.
Do you mind just elaborating a little bit on that for the people that don't know what a 1031 is?
Yeah, 1031 exchange allows you to defer paying capital gains tax and depreciation recapture tax on a property that you sell. You have to use a qualified 1031 exchange intermediary to handle the funds. You can't touch those. So when at closing, the check goes to them into a trust account instead of to you. And on the back end, when you close, they pay your part to the closing title company. So they kind of step into your shoes, so to speak.
Right.
And some of the requirements that you have to worry about is you have 45 days from the date that you close to identify your replacement properties. And if one falls out, it can cause a little bit of heart palpitations. And I did have that happen on one of them, where the seller backed out 2 days before we were supposed to close and my clock ran out.
Yeah, because you can only identify so many that you
Right.
might purchase, like 3 or so, right?
You can actually purchase quite a few.
Or, I mean, identified properties, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it depends on the amount
guess it
that
depends
you're
on-
moving of
okay.
money. We went from one building to multiple buildings in some cases, and in other later exchanges when we sold a lot of the duplexes, we went from multiple buildings to a larger apartment complex. It just has to be handled, and when you have the multiples, the clock starts on the close of the sale of the first one.
Mm-hmm.
So it can cause some heart palpitations if you can't find something, or if your seller backs out. Once you identify those and submit your list, you have 180 days from the date of your first sale close to close on them. That's usually not the problem. It's usually that identification process and trying to find something. So sometimes you get pushed into buying stuff you wouldn't otherwise buy because of the clocks.
Yeah. Were you able to figure out exactly approximately how much in taxes that your tax liability that you're able to defer to another date?
It was hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Okay. So instead of having to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars, it's worth doing an exchange.
It is.
Because what is the fee for an exchange? $1,000?
Oh, less.
Yeah. Okay.
Our biggest fee, and with multiple closings, was like $900.
Okay. So worth looking into.
It is, and it's also
portfolio
worth
in
shopping different exchange intermediaries because they have different fee structures.
Mm-hmm. Great. So here you are 2 years later.
Yeah.
You went from 20 to 131.
Yeah, now I'm at 131.
You don't work anymore at your day job anymore, right?
Correct.
Okay. Congratulations, by the way.
Oh, it's nice not having to fight the alarm clock in the morning and
Yeah.
doing
So
those long days.
about how long did it take you to do the whole purchasing process of, okay, sold the 20 and then all of a sudden I'm up over 100 units here in the Midwest. How long did that whole process take?
The whole process took us about a year.
Okay.
So it took us a year, give or take a month, to go from 20 doors to 134 doors at the time.
And I imagine you were probably traveling quite a bit, right? To pull all this off? Or were you relying...
Every 3 months I'd fly over there and check stuff out.
Okay. And during the purchasing process, did you leave your job at that time, or were you still working your job?
No, I was still working my job.
Oh, wow. Okay. So that's a busy year.
It was.
How's life now?
Nice.
Yeah. Is it, portfolio, it's in another state. Is it harder to manage or not as hard? Because now you have a property manager, but there's so many units. I'm sure you still have to be involved quite a bit, right?
Right. What a lot of people think is when you have a property manager that you don't have to do anything. That isn't necessarily the case. You have to manage the manager.
Yeah.
Make sure they're doing what you want them to do, and kind of adjust their course as needs be. So, we still talk to folks on that end several times a week.
Okay.
Just adjusting their course and giving input.
Okay.
So things don't spiral out in a direction we don't want it to go.
Right. So how many hours a week would you say that takes of your time at this point?
At this time, because of our current property manager structure, they're having us pay the invoices instead of doing the trust account approach.
Mm-hmm.
I spend about a day a week, both on phone calls and then processing invoices.
Gotcha. Not too bad.
Yeah,
Okay.
We're trying to get that part adjusted so I don't have to process the invoices, and it'll drop down to maybe an hour a week.
Have you considered hiring anybody to just take that place once, a part-time employee?
I have.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't made that leap yet, but we've certainly considered that, and we've been talking about it.
Yeah. Okay. So the 131 that you have now, I know you said you sold off of a couple, and I think they were in a different city that you weren't fond of, right?
Yeah. They were in Carbondale, Illinois, and weren't performing like the others.
Yeah.
And another investor approached us and wanted them, so we sold them and carried the note back.
Oh, perfect. And for those that don't know what he's saying there, carry the note back as in you did seller financing for the buyer that purchased those properties, right?
Right. So over the term of the note, we'll profit about $100,000 on the deal.
Gotcha. Now, what I remember about your presentation a few months ago, that I really loved what you did, you got some extremely conservative notes on all these deals that you bought. Like, you're not highly leveraged.
No.
But they all have mortgages, right?
Not all of them.
No?
We own
Okay.
a number of them outright.
Okay.
Of the ones that we have mortgages, they're usually the medium to larger multifamily places. And we have at least 40% equity on all of those. and went with a 15-year amortization.
Mhm.
The thought was when I hit 70, everything will be paid off and I'll get a nice $100,000 a year bump.
Right on.
Versus
Still on
most
track
people
for that,
are,
or are you speeding it up with the excess cash flow?
we're still on track with that. The
Mhm.
thought is once we get the management smoothed out a little bit more, then we could speed it up.
Gotcha. So with out-of-state investments, what are some of the biggest challenges that you're running into that you could never have anticipated?
Well, there's a couple of them. One's making sure the property manager's doing what you expect of them. A lot of times when you first get them, they make a lot of promises and they seem like they're doing a good job for the first few months, and then they start sliding and not really performing. The other one is on the maintenance folks and the contractors that are hired by the property manager. A lot of times if you don't have someone that's used to managing contractors, they'll try to skate and overcharge you for stuff, and we really watch that closely.
Right.
Yeah, we had one guy that the property manager hired between turns to do some maintenance work on it. Met with the guy. I was a little concerned about the weekly bills I was getting and said, how much more time do you have? He goes, only 3 days. And we'd been paying him weekly.
Mm-hmm.
3 days came and went, and then he sent me a bill for $10,000 unexpectedly, so we fired him.
Yeah. So was that your biggest horror story, or do you have a good one for us?
That's the biggest horror story.
Oh, okay.
It was just managing the contractors and the maintenance people, making sure they don't overcharge you and actually are doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Gotcha. Are there any really great things that came out of this that you really didn't anticipate would happen?
Big thing was being able to quit my day job.
Yeah.
And spend more time with my wife. She had had some health problems over the last few years, and that was important for us. Also, we picked up some really nice properties, and our plan is to pass those on to our children when we pass away and give them a pretty good leg up. And we've got some pretty nice apartment complexes that they'll inherit.
Yeah.
And the beautiful part of that is they get it at a stepped up basis, so those capital gains and depreciation taxes that we deferred go away.
They do. Yeah. So if you miss that, so a 1031 exchange, when you pass it on to your kids and you die, you're not really, while you're alive, you still owe those taxes, right?
Yes. If you
just
sell the
defer 'em to
building and
another
take
property.
the cash.
You're
yeah.
just pushing them out. You pass away. Your kids don't inherit that debt. It just, or the IRS debt, it just goes away.
And that's the beautiful thing of real estate. That's why a lot of wealthy people use real estate for wealth transfer.
Yeah. Awesome. Are you working on anything locally?
Not at the moment. Mostly been visiting with other starting investors, giving them advice. And I met with a fellow last night that was just starting, and he wanted advice on how to get his first place. So we chatted for a couple hours and gave him some ideas and direction. And
Do you have any good recommendations for people out there that are just getting started? What they could do to get their first investment property?
One of the approaches that folks that don't have a lot of money that want to get started, that you start seeing a lot of, is Bigger Pockets calls it house hacking, where they buy a small multifamily and move into half of it and have the tenants pay most of the mortgage for the whole building and essentially live rent-free, and then they're able to save more money and move on to the next one. The beautiful thing of that is with the FHA program, then they can get into these for 5% down and occupy it, do some work on it, force some appreciation, and then if they want to have it reappraised and refinance it down the road and get a conventional loan and get rid of that private mortgage insurance. And that's the advice I gave the fellow last night.
Yeah, some solid advice. Any advice on what not to do as a real estate investor?
You hear a lot of the gurus tell you, it's all based on the numbers. You don't need to look at it. I disagree with that. There's a lot of really creative picture takers that can post pictures online that make things look wonderful, and you show up in person, it's like, it must have been a really old picture. They don't look the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we have a real estate photography company right now, and it's this morning editor is in there editing out dog poop out of the yard, and they're paid to make the pictures look as best as they can online. But
Oh yeah, and it's
but
clear
yeah,
when you
you're
go
right.
look
It's
at
just
places.
you never know what you're actually going to get until you physically check it out.
Yeah, even
Pictures
if you
are always going to be deceiving because they have to be to get traffic.
yeah, yeah, and even if you send someone to look at it for you, say you're investing out of state, their idea of a great place might be different than yours, and they may not look at the same things that you look at. It's great to have someone to trust, but when you show up and you relied on someone else and you look at it, it's like, that's going to be expensive to fix. Something that they may not have even noticed.
Right. All right. So what's the plan moving forward? Are you planning on buying any more units, or are you just gonna just let the clock do the work now?
Well, for our existing units, we're going to let the clock do the work and focus on paying them off. Moving forward, personally, some other investor friends of I are talking about getting into doing some real estate syndication on bigger projects.
Oh, okay. Would you also be talking that like a similar area?
No, we'll look nationwide.
Nationwide. Okay. Great. Anything else that you want to give advice for the new people that are just checking this out? And let's say for financing, let's say they don't qualify for an FHA loan. Is there anything that they can still do if they find a great deal?
One of the things I always advise people to do is shop banks, because banks have different appetites at different times based on what their balance sheets are. So a no from one bank, it might not be because of you. It might be because of the bank's financial position, that they don't want any more debt at that point.
Wow.
So go ahead and shop them. Not only that, you can get different interest rates and get them to compete against each other and cut their rates a little bit if they really want the deal.
Mm-hmm.
And we would put together a binder and walk it around to the different banks on properties that we were financing or refinancing that had, the 2 years tax returns, the profit and loss, the personal financial statement, details about the property and some of the financials on it, and pass it out to them and then follow up. And you'd always get 2 or 3 that would want to do the deal. You might get several no's, but that's just because of where the bank was or its current financial picture. And we always got pretty good deals and rates that way from the banks.
Mm-hmm.
On the financing part, if you're just starting out and maybe you don't qualify for FHA, but you're into the flipping part, finding private money lenders or hard money loans, start out small. And certainly if you're doing flipping, don't over improve the property for the neighborhood. I've seen that mistake a lot. They watch a lot of the stuff on HDTV and think that they have to put quartz countertops in something that might be a low income neighborhood.
Yeah.
And that's won't help the appraisal.
Right. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I am curious about something. When you first started off real estate investing, you mentioned you got a HELOC on your home. So
Yes.
The purchase that you made was pretty much, it was the down payment, or at least would have been a loan from the equity of your house, personal house that you were in.
It was.
So the then getting to 20 units, did much more of it come out of your own pockets, or was it all based off the Burr strategy and
It was
constantly
all
rolling?
based off the Burr strategy and rolling equity.
Okay. So, and then what you have today, when it's all paid off, what's that portfolio going to be worth?
Today's dollars about $4.5 million.
$4.5 million.
That's today's dollar.
And it started with a $60,000 loan. That's where it started, right?
Yeah, it started-
$60,000 loan from the equity of your house. And when you bought your personal house, how much money did you put down? If you
The
remember.
house that we took the equity out, we put 20% down to start. It lived in it about 10 years before we pulled the $60,000 HELOC out of it.
Okay.
So we always pretty conservative, always kept at least 20% equity in properties as we were rolling it. The underwriting criteria has changed now. So a non-owner occupied, they at least want 25% down.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be if you had that 20% equity, you could avoid the private mortgage insurance, and they were usually happy to do that. And they used to put second mortgages on investment properties pretty readily. With the current underwriting, that's a lot tougher to do.
Gotcha. I think it's pretty fascinating. I mean, it just started with you just bought your own personal residence and you leveraged it a little bit, not too crazy. And then you did it again and again and again, and it all just rolled into a $4.5 million portfolio that will be paid off within 15 years.
Yeah, and the beauty is as you're buying real estate, you can negotiate better deals on stuff and get instant equity that way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the last 35 doors we bought, we paid cash for it because it was out of a self-directed retirement account. And I just had the annual evaluation done, and the current value is $400,000 more than we paid for them. Not too bad in a year, right?
Not too bad. So what kind of cash flow does that spit out?
Which one? Those 35 doors?
All of it.
Depends on the month and how people are paying and vacancy rates.
Right.
It fluctuates a little bit. Gross receipts vary anywhere from $35,000 to $55,000 a month,
Okay.
and then we're paying expenses off of that.
Gotcha. And is that and that's before debt service?
It's before debt service and any other expenses. Yeah.
Wow. All right. Well, that's not bad. So, assuming we don't even have any more rent increases or appreciation in the next 15 years, you think you'll survive on $35,000 a month?
Well, that's not what I take out of it. But
well, yeah.
yeah, assuming they get paid off and everything, yeah, we'll be fine.
You'll be okay.
Yeah, the beauty of the strategy that we adopted is so many of the people that I worked with, you know, they were saving for their 401k
Mm-hmm.
and had a little pension because we worked for a power company. And, you know, they were going to rely on Social Security and that and pray that they outlived their money
Yeah.
because they're chewing down their assets because they're in mutual funds. You know, my approach, I can insure the asset, so if it catches fire or tornado hits it and it goes away, I get paid.
Yeah.
I get monthly income off of it forever
Mm-hmm.
until I sell it. So I'm never dwindling down the value of my retirement portfolio. And it's paying me as much as I was making at my day job just from the retirement portfolio part. So
Yeah.
it's a win-win.
Win-win-win.
And most people are worrying about running out of money, and just about the time that they start sweating at age 70, will get a nice $100,000 a year bump because all the mortgage will be paid off at that point.
It's got to feel good.
Does.
Well, good work. I don't know if anyone's told you that yet. I'm sure they have, but I'm impressed. I think everybody aspires to do what you're doing someday. And thanks for sharing your story. Anything you want to add?
One of the things you hear from the gurus is that real estate's get rich quick. You know, my path is more, you know, steady and focused and taking a long-term view on it. And I think that works better for me. You know, the folks that go for the huge scores simultaneously, you know, trying to make, you know, multiple $100,000 a year. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't for them. But if you use the clock and plan for the long term, you know, real estate's pretty forgiving in the long term.
Yeah. And you can do the math in advance.
You can.
You can make your decisions based off what's in the Excel sheet and not just a guess.
And yeah, and when the recession hit, my wife was panicking a little bit because the values went down because everybody was liquidating. And I said, well, you don't lose till you sell, so let's just hold on to it. Tenants kept paying, so.
Did your cash flow go down as well when the market went down? Or did it stay relatively stable?
The first winter it did, because I had some tenants that thought, well, economy's bad, I'll stop paying rent. So we had to, that first winter out of 20, we had 6 vacancies, and that kind of hurt, but it still covered the mortgages, and we had our job, and it worked out.
It worked out.
But once we got past that, we were able to get them refilled, and then the cash flow stayed pretty consistent.
Got to be glad you didn't sell when everybody else was.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It worked out really well for us.
Yeah. All right. Thanks again for your time. I appreciate you doing this.
Oh, my pleasure, Nick.
Thank you very much. We'll see you around.
Yep.
All right. Have a good one. Another clap. Help sync up the audio.
Thanks for tuning in to the Investor Shed podcast. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel for instant access to all future episodes. If you or someone you know has investing experience or stories to share, reach out to us in the comments or via email.